What's up guys, my name is Ace, and with the Black Ops 6 beta now over, today I wanted to share my final beta review. So the main things that I liked about the beta and I'm looking forward to in Black Ops 6, some of the bigger issues that I think really need some attention before the launch of the game, and then after that just a good handful of little things, maybe some like minor bugs or issues that I noticed throughout the beta that aren't deal breakers by any means, but maybe could use some work. Now keep in mind with this is all going to be based on my experiences. Part of this is going to be very subjective as well. And I realize many people had a very different experience to what I had. And if you did, please let me know in those comments down below. I really want to see what everybody in general was thinking about this and the experiences that they had. But let's dive into just some of my general thoughts on this. For the first weekend of the beta, things were pretty hit or miss for me. And then especially toward the end of that first week, it actually got really bad for me. The desync was horrible. It felt like I was dying instantly, but took a long time to kill enemy players. And I quite simply couldn't keep up, and there was nothing I could really do to change that. Whereas for the second weekend, it's like they flipped a switch and I was suddenly on the opposite end of that. And throughout the playtime that I managed to get in the second weekend, it was like a totally different game, and it was a far more enjoyable experience for me. Not only did those desync issues just disappear for me in the second weekend, I don't think I had any issues at all with that throughout the second weekend. I had some other connection related issues, which we'll get into when I talk about the big things. But as far as desync or like time to kill versus time to die, that was literally just solved for me in the second weekend. And then on top of that, the spawn adjustments they made were very welcome. And I'm not going to say the spawns were in a perfect state in the second weekend, but general flow-wise and predictability-wise, the spawns were in a noticeably better state than they were in the first weekend. I noticed outside of Babylon, which didn't get any spawn tuning because it wasn't available in the first weekend, so that's the one exception. Outside of that map, I actually found the flow was far easier to read and predict. We didn't have crazy spawn flips happening all the time, so I wasn't getting shot in the back nearly as much in the second weekend from people that spawned somewhere where you couldn't have reasonably predicted that they were going to spawn there. And with those two improvements combined for me, the game got significantly better. As for Omni Movement, my experience with that, I really like Omni Movement. I like the idea of it from the beginning. However, when I first got into the beta, I will admit that it definitely felt a little bit clunky at times. However, I think that was just due to the learning curve that's attached to it, and once I learned the timings on things a little bit better and how to chain the movement together better, by the end of the second weekend, things felt really nice and smooth with it, and I'm actually kind of dreading going back to playing Modern Warfare 3 and not having that Omni movement available. Another thing I appreciate with the second weekend is they provided double weapon XP, and that allowed me to max out several of the guns throughout the beta and really truly mess around with different setups. I kind of wish they would have done that from the beginning of the beta, but I mean, at least they did it at some point. And now that I had enough time to play around with that, I'm really liking the simplified attachment system and selection quite a bit. Like, I think there's a lot of great ways that you can build your guns, but it's not overcomplicated like we're seeing in Modern Warfare 3. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the advanced stats. I know that was a feature that wasn't available in the beta, but it is coming for the launch of the game. And I think that's really going to help build those class setups as well and mess around with totally different styles of class setups. Also, a quick note, in the second weekend, the Tonto 22, I just love that SMG. It felt really good. I mean, it was my favorite when I played at the studio a few months back as well, and it's no different now. The Tonto felt great. I think it's balanced reasonably well. Like, it's got a lot of power potential to it, but it's also very unforgiving if you miss shots due to its really slow rate of fire. So overall, by the end of the second weekend, I was actually having a blast with the game, and I can't wait to get my hands back on it, which is great to see because I was actually feeling a little bit skeptical and a bit worried by the end of the first weekend, especially with all those desync related issues that I was having. Well, that combined with the spawns as well. The spawns were way worse than the first weekend. But with all of that in mind, I still think there are some fairly big things that I definitely feel like need some work, so let's dive into those things. And the number one thing I've got on this list here is those stutters. They need to be gone. I don't know what's causing these stutters. I know a lot of people are referring to it as packet bursts or packet loss. I'm not entirely convinced that that's what's actually causing it because I have the packet loss indicator and that basically never moves when I'm getting these big stutters in game. But whatever it is that's causing that is very frustrating, and it's not something I've ever dealt with in Call of Duty, at least not on a regular basis like I was experiencing throughout the beta. Now, I will note, on the final day, the Monday morning when I was playing, the stutters were far less prevalent than what I was experiencing before then, but they were still happening. They were still popping up from time to time. You'll probably see a bunch of them throughout the gameplays you're watching in the background. And that's obviously a big issue, especially if it's happening to people that have a very optimized connection. They're playing wired like myself. I'm not playing on Wi-Fi or anything. Everything I've got is optimized very well for gaming, and yet I'm still getting these big stutters and skips, and that's a big problem. Next, on a somewhat similar note, for the big things, while I mentioned that the desync issues essentially just disappeared for me in the second weekend, I know that's not the case for many other people out there, and therefore it's likely that they still need to be tuning and tweaking things to get things in a good state when it comes to that, which I'm sure they will do over time. They always do that every single year with Call of Duty. I don't know why it seems like they have to start from scratch with that every year, but I'm sure there's a good technical reason for it. In either case, I do hope that stabilizes nicely for the launch of the game. Then let's talk about spawns a little bit. Again, this is an area where I do think it improved very nicely from the first weekend to the second, but I still think there's room for tweaking. I'm sure they've been collecting a lot of data for the second weekend, especially on Babylon, and I just hope that this is still a work in progress and something they'll continue to dial in before launch and then even after launch as they collect more data, especially on the maps that we didn't have access to in the beta. Because that often happens as well. When a game launches, the beta maps will often play really well when the game first launches, but every other map kind of sucks spawn-wise, and I think it's just because they need to collect that data and make those specific spawn changes that are suited to that particular map. And on the topic of maps, this is actually a big one where I think I'm going to make a dedicated video on this as well, diving into a lot more detail. But I do want to say, after playing through both weekends, I do think this was a bit of a weaker point for Black Ops 6. Now, I'm not going to say that I absolutely hated all of the maps and these are the worst maps we've ever played in Call of Duty. I'm looking at you, Modern Warfare 2019. But at the same time, for me at least, these maps just didn't seem to quite hit that Treyarch standard that I expect when it comes to map design. And I'm just talking about the core maps we had access to. I don't really care about the strike maps all that much. I expect those to be essentially just random chaos. But for the core maps, I just couldn't help but think as I was playing through them and really learning them that there were just elements that seemed like they were missing from the maps or just little problem areas with those. But again, I don't want to dive into too much detail in this video because it's already likely to be a fairly long video. And I do think this topic deserves a video on its own. But next up, for the bigger things, the matchmaking and the disbanding lobbies. I know this horse is dead and we're going to continue to beat it here, but if I'm providing my honest feedback on how I think things could improve, at least for me, based on my experience, I do feel the matchmaking, especially in the first weekend, seemed very overtuned. Now, I also understand the first weekend was the closed portion of the beta. It's more likely that you're going to have the more serious players logging in and playing on that weekend compared to the second weekend, which was open. And I will say the second weekend definitely felt more loose for me, although that could have also just been me being on the good side of desync, so maybe I was playing against good players, but I had a built-in desync advantage over them or something. But in either case, that modern matchmaking system, it's probably not going anywhere, but I really don't like it, and if this is a feedback video, that's some feedback I've got. Also, disbanding lobbies. I still think this is the worst change that they have made to the Call of Duty franchise. Again, just like with the matchmaking system, it's probably not going anywhere anytime soon, but persistent lobbies would really go a long way and breathe a ton of life back into the game, in my opinion at least. But I'm sure there's some data somewhere that shows that players don't like the choice of being able to stay in a lobby or leave a lobby for themselves, and it's better if the game just decides that for them. In either case, that's going to wrap it up for the bigger issues that I would say I had with the beta. Now let's move into the next section where it's just a bunch of little things. These are going to be all over the place, just random little notes that I was making as I was playing through the beta that I feel could potentially use some work. A lot of this is going to be subjective and really maybe doesn't need to be adjusted at all, but I'm just going to bring it up anyway. And the first thing I want to talk about here are the specialties. And these are those additional perks you get when you match up 3 perks of the same color on your class setup. Well, I definitely think the idea is interesting, and playing around with those bonuses was actually quite nice, especially with Recon and Enforcer. Those 2 bonuses were very powerful and really felt nice to use. At the same time, that kind of worries me that they did feel so good to use and they did feel so powerful, because by the end of the second weekend, if I wasn't using a combination of perks that gave me one of those 2 specialties, I really felt like I was missing out and I was doing something wrong. And I do fear that that is actually going to limit perk variety quite a bit once the game comes out. I think at the moment, it's too much of a trade-off to not be using one of those specialties. And so as much as I like the perks that are attached to those specialties, I think perhaps a little bit of a rework may be in order to make them a little bit less attractive to the point where you don't really feel like you need to use one of them without putting yourself at a big disadvantage. And I think that's especially true with the wall hack that you get when you spawn in with the Recon specialty. I would really like to see that one toned down. I definitely feel it awards you with a bit too much information right off spawn. And it's not like you really earned that powerful information. All you had to do was die and hit the respawn button. It's not like a death streak or something that's designed to level the playing field if you're dying a bunch. It's just something where it's a perk on your class, and it's going to award you plenty of free kills off of spawn that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. And on the flip side of that, it's kind of frustrating where you don't do anything wrong, you're just getting kills and pushing up in the direction of the enemy spawn point. There's going to be those enemies that spawn in and get your exact location in real time through walls without you even knowing that that's taking place. And it is frustrating to die to that knowing like, oh yeah, he saw me through the wall. Like I couldn't have known that, I didn't know that, and now I'm dead. So if they don't do anything else with the specialties, at the very least, I really hope they reconsider that recon wall hack and maybe make some adjustments to it to just take some of the current power away from it. Next up, I do want to talk about headshots a little bit in this section. In the game's current state, headshots with most guns are literally useless unless you're using the CHF barrel. And when I say literally, I mean in the maximum damage range, it'll take you the exact same number of shots to kill somebody to the toe as it will to the head. And in my opinion, that's taking things a little bit too far. I'm totally cool with having that headshot multiplier being fairly low to the point where one single headshot mixed in with body shots isn't going to be enough to change things. However, I do think if you're hitting multiple headshots with body shots, at least with many of the guns, I feel that should be reducing the number of shots to kill, without having to use an additional attachment as well. Now, I don't think every single gun needs that power, and that's something that I think could be played around with individual guns. So maybe if a gun is like highly versatile and really good on its own without headshots, maybe in that case, to keep that gun in check, you make sure that headshots don't do anything for you. But for another gun that maybe feels a bit weaker overall to the body, well, in that case, maybe give that one some headshot potential without any attachments required. It basically just felt really odd that, especially when you're fighting against somebody that's on a head glitch and you have a very small target to shoot at, which is their head, and you manage to hit that target pretty effectively, you're not gaining any bonus for doing that. And I do think that awards a little bit too much power to somebody that's on a really good head glitch. Now, this one is definitely not a deal breaker. If they leave headshot damage exactly how it is, it's totally fine. Like, the game was still fun without it. It just feels a little bit odd knowing that headshots just don't do anything for you without a barrel. Next up, something I noticed quite a bit throughout the beta is there doesn't appear to be any flash or stun audio. When you get stunned or flashed, the effect just suddenly starts taking place, and that's really jarring to run into. There's actually a few times, especially in the first weekend before I started to get used to this, where I got flashed and I have this setting where it turns my screen black instead of white, and I actually thought the game crashed. I thought my system crashed because my screen just suddenly went black. There was no audio attached to that at all. It was just my image was there 1 second and it was gone the next. So that one's a fairly obvious one, and I'm hoping they'll be taking care of that. Next up, something I dealt with throughout the entire duration of the beta. I was hoping it would get fixed for the second weekend, but it wasn't. This is sometimes you just can't seem to call a streak in. And I think what happens is in some situations, your streak selection that you want to call in, it actually like defaults to one streak up where you don't actually have that streak available to call in. So if you're trying to call it in, it won't work. But you do have a streak that is available to call in, and you have to like manually tab down to that streak in order to call it in. And that's definitely just a minor annoyance, and I'd like them to take care of that. Then on the topic of streaks, I said it in the first weekend, and I still stand behind this. I do think the streak cost is a little bit too high in the game. However, after thinking about this more, I think instead of reducing the cost to earn those streaks, why not just provide a few more objective opportunities to earn score? Something I was noticing is if you were actively on a contested point in like domination or in hardpoint, for instance, so you're on the point, the enemy's on the point, and you get that kill, you're only getting 125 score for that kill. And when you compare that to some of the older Call of Duty games, I believe in some of them, you'd get up to like 200 score for that kill. I think if we provided more opportunities to get more score, if you're actively on a contested or an enemy objective point, then I think that would encourage even more objective play. It would help alleviate that issue of the streak cost feeling like it's a bit too high in its current state, and it would provide more opportunities to earn those streaks, but only for the players that are being more aggressive and getting on that objective. And speaking of going on kill streaks, one little feature I really hope they're willing to add to the game is the kill counter that shows you what your current streak is after every kill that you get. It may be such a minor feature, but I really think it goes a long way for a lot of people. I myself really enjoy having that kill counter present. Even if you just have it as a toggleable option and have it off by default, I would really like the ability to turn on a kill counter in game. After that, we're bouncing all over the place here. One thing I noticed on Skyline is the above water visibility is terrible. If somebody goes underwater in the pool, it seems like they just disappear. It's really hard to see them under the water. And this definitely has me concerned for some of the other maps that are going to have water present as well. Like as of now, it's only Skyline in the beta. but there are going to be other maps that have a decent amount of water, and I'm hoping we'll be able to see the targets at least a little bit more clearly if you're above water and they're underwater. Another minor thing, but I ran into this quite a few times playing on Skyline, we have that zip line in the elevator, and something I noticed is if somebody dies at the base of that and drops a gun near that zip line, it seems to always prioritize picking up the gun rather than using the zip line. And I'd much prefer, if you were in a certain radius of that zip line, I think the zip line should be taking priority over picking up a weapon. I actually had quite a few deaths where I was just standing at the base of that zip line, picking up guns over and over again, trying to use it, and then obviously just dying because I'm standing there like an idiot. Next up, in the new kill order mode where you have the HVT, I really noticed that when you kill the HVT player, when you down them, it appears they're actually invincible for a certain period of time as they're in that animation as they drop down into a down state. And I just found that to be really frustrating, especially because they have a pistol and they can shoot back in the process. There were several times where I'm just pumping rounds directly through them, and oftentimes those were my last rounds in my magazine that would have been enough to take them out and finish them off, but those shots just disappear, and then they have a pistol to shoot back at me and I'm out of ammo, when that shouldn't have been the case. It should have been enough to kill them. After that, something I noticed several times throughout the beta is certain textures just didn't seem to be the right resolution. Even when you're using the optimal texture streaming settings, you have plenty of bandwidth to deal with that. It just seems like certain textures weren't streaming properly, and therefore at times I noticed certain areas of the map, for instance, just didn't look like a current generation game. It looked like a previous gen game, which obviously isn't a great feeling for the brand new shiny game. And I suspect this has to do with the fact that they're leaning more heavily into texture streaming. And I have provided this feedback in the past, but I'll say it again here. Please, if it's possible, let us just download a high resolution texture pack once for those of us that have the space to do that, so that we don't ever have to use texture streaming to get the best looking game possible 100% of the time. Now, after that one, there was a little bug I noticed when creating class setups. A lot of the times if I adjusted attachments and I was using like the perk greed wildcard, for instance, many times I noticed it would actually overwrite my perk greed wildcard and it would give me gunfighter instead, even when I was only dealing with 5 attachments. I never tried to put a 6th one on or anything. And so it would be nice to get that bug taken care of, because I actually played several matches where I didn't realize I had the gunfighter wildcard on, so I was still only using 5 attachments, and then I didn't have a perk that I thought I had on that class. And speaking of menu items being reset or changed automatically, I noticed throughout the entire beta that many of the settings would reset. Like my mini-map would be square one game, and then for some reason the next time I booted it up, it's a round mini-map, and my HUD is a totally different HUD from what I selected. And then piling on that, the party host would often automatically switch. So if I'm hosting a party and I'm hosting a lobby, after a match, many times I would find out I was no longer the party host and somebody else was in charge of the party now. And that was kind of frustrating. So just a few little bugs and issues that I think definitely need to be taken care of. And then I guess one last thing here I've got on my list. I know this is really out of order. This is the winner's circle. Now, personally, I don't mind a winner's circle being in the game, and at least we have the ability to like pull up the scoreboard and take a look at that while the winner's circle stuff is happening. We're not forced to watch it. But one little minor annoyance I had throughout the beta is people having the ability to spam their emotes in the winner's circle. I think you should be able to select your one emote, you do that one emote, and that's it. You can't cancel it, you can't do multiple emotes, you can't do the same emote over and over and over again, making some weird audio going on in the background as well that you can't turn off or avoid in the moment. Just keep it simple, let players select their one emote, and that's it. And there we go. That's going to wrap it up for the list that I was throwing together as I was playing, for just a bunch of little things that I noticed that I feel could be improved or need some fixing. And with all of that combined, the good stuff, the bad stuff, and the stuff that still needs some work, I've got to say, I'm really looking forward to Black Ops 6 this year. I think this is a Call of Duty that I'm really going to personally vibe with quite a bit. I know that's not going to be the case for everyone. For many people, like the Omni movement, for instance, is just going to straight up push them away from the game, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, it's nice to see a change of pace. Some CODs are going to be a bit on the slower side, other ones are going to be on the faster, arcadey side, and this is going to be one of those CODs that's on the faster, arcadey side. And as long as they can get the spawns under control for launch and we get some better maps or better variety of maps, maybe more medium size, with some better flow to them. That's probably my biggest gameplay related concern right now, is just the general map flow on the launch maps combined with the launch spawns. If they can get that taken care of, as well as the skips and stutters and the desync issues for people that are having that, outside of those things, I really don't have any like serious, deeply rooted concerns with this game. There's nothing really at the core of the gameplay design that I strongly dislike and I'm gonna hate. Like I look back to Modern Warfare 2, for instance, and that perk system from the beginning, the moment I saw that perk system, I hated it. And I hated it all year round, and it's just something I had to deal with. I can't really think of anything that's so deeply rooted into Black Ops 6 right now that I'm gonna hate throughout the entire year based on my experience with the beta. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a handful of things that need some work, need some improvement, and some tweaks and tuning, but overall, I'm feeling quite good about this, and I'm really looking forward to launch. Now, of course, these are just my opinions, though, and I'd love to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about Black Ops 6 now that the beta is over? Are you also feeling generally optimistic about things? Do you like the Omni movement, for instance? Or are you on the opposite side of this? Did you not have a good experience with the beta, and are you not going to be getting Black Ops 6? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.